Now everyone knows the MCU's kind of fallen off. You see everyone talking about it online, even Marvel themselves have acknowledged it, and most of us can draw a rough line of where we think it went wrong. Marvel reached its peak in 2019 with Endgame. They had the entire world in the palm of their hands, and then failed to maintain that going forward. While there were some highlights along the way, the franchise as a whole just didn't live up to what had come before, leading people to believe that the series was past its sell-by dates. It was in the gutter. Old Marvel good, new Marvel bad. But how did they screw up exactly? What did they do differently after Endgame? Seriously, think of a reason. I'll give you a second. Now, a lot of you will have said too many projects. This is an obvious one. If you have 3 to 4 movies coming out per year, plus all of these Disney Plus shows they started doing, people are either going to get bored or overwhelmed, and they'll just give up. It makes sense, right? New Marvel just has too much stuff now. It sucks that Kang went nowhere. I thought his introduction was incredible. I never really got the complaints that, oh, he got defeated by ants, he got cancelled by ants. Like, really? Have you fucking seen Ants? The guys who use chemical weapons to steal each other's children and turn them into slaves? Also, he didn't even lose to the ants. That just doesn't happen. They just get in his way for a bit. Anyways, overall, that went nowhere. And Doctor Doom hasn't been set up, like, at all, which does suck. But I think we're forgetting that prior to Infinity War, Thanos didn't really do shit. Oh, a big purple guy sitting in a chair. It was only once Infinity War came out that he actually got a proper character and backstory beyond showing up for 5 seconds at a time. It's not unreasonable to think that Marvel could do the same with Doctor Doom, set up all of his motivations and backstory in Avengers Doomsday. Obviously it won't be as satisfying, but I don't think this lack of setup has ruined the MCU by itself. Other people will have mentioned superhero fatigue, and I would have agreed until I saw Superman and was reminded that I'm more than happy for superhero films to continue so long as they're not total dog shit. Okay, maybe that's it. Maybe it's that simple. What if the MCU is just dog shit now, in terms of overall quality? I mean, Love and Thunder was painful, Black Widow, Eternals, Brave New World, all completely forgettable, and the TV show's very hit or miss. But if you think about it, and I'm gonna get in trouble here, you could kinda say the same thing about old Marvel. I'd never sit down to watch Thor: The Dark World again, unless it was a deliberate act of self-torture. Films like Ant-Man and the Wasp or Incredible Hulk weren't exactly masterpieces either. Even the ones that are supposed to be good, like if you go back and watch them, they don't exactly look great half the time. There are a bunch of jokes that I roll my eyes at, the villains are mostly forgettable, and the TV shows, also very hit or miss. To me, a lot of the MCU has never been that good on a technical level. Now, you don't have to agree with me here. You can think that The Dark World is a masterpiece and that Iron Man floating head syndrome is a good thing, actually. But I think we can both still agree that there was something about that older stuff, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, something that stopped me from noticing the bad parts, or rather stopped me from caring. And it's not a matter of quality or volume, because I've really enjoyed their recent stuff. I loved Thunderbolts, genuinely. I had a great time with Fantastic Four. Wonder Man was incredible, one of the best things they've done, but I'm not exactly dying to see the new Avengers movie. I'll watch it when it comes out, like it's hard not to be excited for it, but at the same time, that magic just isn't there anymore. That otherworldly hype, that grasp that Marvel had on the world, it's no longer there. So what actually happened? When I set out to do research for this video, I was asking myself the question, what did Marvel do differently after Endgame? But then as I read through books and articles and all these different interviews, I started to realise that Marvel didn't change anything.
The MCU is probably one of the most impressive acts of improvisation. Why is Thanos at the end of Avengers 1? Well, that's just because Joss Whedon needed to explain why Loki had an army. Whose dick was he sucking to get in an army of little men? It's just Thanos. Thanos is behind it all. And then they just kept procrastinating him because Joss Whedon wanted to do Ultron and James Gunn didn't really want to do Thanos, the villain. So they just kept pushing him down the line until they were like, let's actually make him the big guy since we've been accidentally foreshadowing him.
If you look behind the scenes, you could argue that a good chunk of Marvel's success comes from them just taking these massive risks and it all just working out for them. This is why Jeff Bridges described Iron Man 1 as a student film, right? They didn't have a lock script while filming, everyone was constantly changing their minds, adding a bunch of shit last minute. But with the success of that first film, Marvel learned very early on that this improvisational method could actually work. In fact, it could do more than work. It could make you $585 million on your first movie, and you didn't have to give any of it to Sony. I think this attitude largely worked because of the sheer passion these guys had, this love for both the comic characters and filmmaking in general. Most importantly, importantly, the actual guys on set, these were people who, yes, understood the source material and they loved making movies, but they were also able to thrive in this improvisational environment. The directors could work with the actors to come up with new stuff on the fly. They could work around these last-minute changes that Marvel was always throwing at them. It's no wonder Marvel ended up hiring the Russo brothers, despite their only experience being in TV shows like Arrested Development or Community. Because with comedy, you have to be good at improv. That's like the whole thing. In the middle of it all was the big boss, producer Kevin Feige, a man who I have been secretly drawing this whole time, riding an alligator. Why an alligator, you ask? Don't worry, this will become clear soon enough. Anyways, Feige was both a massive comic fan and a massive movie fan, the best of both worlds. When they were starting on Captain America 1, Feige was advised not to make it a World War II film. He was told that mainstream audiences wouldn't want to watch a film set entirely in the 1940s, and that such a decision would kill the film. And yeah, if your primary goal is just to make a movie that makes a ton of money and nothing else, then you should take that advice. Sony would have taken that advice. But Feige knew that World War II was a big part of the Captain America comics, and one of his favourite films was a period piece. And so he was like, fuck you, I like period films. In fact, not only am I going to make Captain America a period film, I'm also going to get the guy who made one of my favourite films to direct it. Now, Captain America didn't make a lot of money compared to the others. It made 80 million less than Thor, 200 million less than Iron Man, and it had absolutely nothing on other studios' films like Spider-Man or The Dark Knight. Maybe making it a period film did screw them in the short term. I'm sure these other studios were looking down at Marvel like, oh, that's cute. But in the long run, having this central figure in your company, this guy who knows his shit, who sticks to his guns, who can manage disagreements while defending his vision of what's best for the universe as a whole, that's what Marvel had over everyone else. That was the massive driving force behind their success. Now we all know the Avengers was successful, that Marvel's risk paid off, but I don't think anyone truly appreciates just how badly they fucked over everyone else. See, when Marvel started out making their movies, the concept of a cinematic universe didn't exist. No one even knew what that would look like. So they had no competitors, no expectations from the audience. They could afford to be patient, to settle for modest profits while they put all the pieces in place, building the foundation slowly over 5 years and getting everyone familiar with these characters, this world. But now, with the release of the Avengers, things are different. Audiences now have a taste, not just of a cinematic universe, but a cinematic universe that's already been fully realised. This world that's already been crafted to the point where you can now pluck different characters from different films, put them together in a new movie, and it all feels natural. You've got a universe with an already established history, familiar locations, organisations, and endless possibilities for even more seamless multi-film storytelling. And because the audience has already experienced what this is like, this interconnected universe already operating at 100% power, they want more of it. Now. Not 5 years from now. They want it now. And so, if you're a rival studio, you can either get your own universe to 100% power as fast as possible, which would result in you having to half-ass it, right? No slow build-up, no proper foundation or world building, just launch right into the big event and fuck yourself straight out the gate. Or you could take your time and do it properly, invest millions of dollars into multiple movies you've no idea aren't going to be a massive clusterfuck. But even then, why would people care about your universe? Marvel's already got their one up and running, everyone's already familiar with it. Even if you do somehow succeed, which is practically impossible without someone like Kevin Feige, Marvel's still going to be known as the ones who did it first, did it better than you, and no matter what, they'll always be at least 5 years ahead of you. So what's the point? And even though Marvel was in this position, they were the only ones in town with this delicious product that no one else could currently produce. They still didn't get comfortable, they continued to take even more risks. Guardians of the Galaxy, that was a massive gamble. Sure, Iron Man and Captain America were relatively unknown before the success of their movies, but Star-Lord and fucking Rocket Raccoon? Even people within Marvel were like, what are we doing? This is a guaranteed flop. Just make more Iron Man movies. Come on, go with what already works. They, of course, were proven wrong, and the Guardians' success cemented Marvel as the top dog of the superhero movie industry. Now, when we try and measure the success of a movie, we usually look at two things. Box office, did it make money? And review scores, did people like it? But there's a third thing that's just as, if not more important to Marvel's success. And unlike review scores or box office numbers, this can't be easily quantified. Any guesses?
They're metrics we can't measure, on a 1 to 10 scale of like, this movie was good, this movie was bad. There's like an ethereal element that my brain likes. It's an intangible feeling. Sometimes things don't have the sauce. Sometimes the creator doesn't have aura.
Now, aura is a word that's used on TikTok and Reels and stuff. Shit like me when my wife gets kidnapped by ISIS or something, but I can't get upset because I'll lose aura, right? It's bullshit. But the actual concept of aura, what it's describing, it's pointing to a very real thing that's very valuable. When you say someone has aura, right, you're usually pointing to a collection of traits. Confidence. They seem sure of themselves. They're not jealous of anyone else, and they'll do what they want. Fuck anyone else's opinion. Effortlessness? Sure, they might work hard, but you don't get the impression that what they do is a struggle for them. They don't even have to try to get attention. Their mere existence just attracts it. Authenticity? You don't feel like this is all an act, like they're putting on a face because they really want to impress people. No, this is them. This is who they are. And mystery, right? You don't know everything about them. You can never 100% predict their next move. You're always anticipating what they're going to do next. The more you think about it, the more you realise that aura's kind of the key ingredient as to why you like the things you do. I'm not talking about the stuff you enjoy casually, that you might pop on in the background. I'm talking about a musician you'll stay up until midnight for their new album. A filmmaker whose movie you'll queue up for on day one. Hell, a fucking YouTuber you'll drop everything for when you see they've uploaded. Those people, the ones that get you really invested, the ones who can generate this otherworldly hype, they most likely have all four of these things. This is why Frank Ocean's career is still going strong, despite him releasing his second studio album a decade ago and then dropping off the face of the earth. This guy got Beyonce on one of his songs, and he just didn't put it in the title. He was that sure of himself, and that's the kind of shit I'm talking about. That decision alone meets all four of the criteria. Now, doing this kind of thing won't necessarily have an impact on your financial or critical success, right? That song title being the way it is, it doesn't make the song better. It's still gonna sound the same. This behaviour might actually cost you growth in the short term. You're actively shooting yourself in the foot, numbers-wise. But at the same time, you're firmly setting the terms of engagement with your audience. You're sending them a silent message saying, I'm the real deal. We're doing things on my terms here. And people can just feel that. They're drawn to it. See, being a successful artist is about creating this powerful image of yourself in the back of everyone else's minds. It's like you're creating this magic that you're trying to get others to believe in. It's not just about getting them to like your stuff. It's about creating an image so strong that they won't even question you. This is good for the artists because it brings them an audience that is eager to embrace everything they do, which allows for artistic freedom and a sustainable career, but it's also good for the audience themselves. When you get lost in this magic, when you believe so much in this thing you're witnessing, that you're just looking up in awe, that's what creates the most exciting, memorable experiences. So in the 2010s, Marvel had that same kind of sauce. Their confidence in their own abilities was obvious. They'd already turned these unwanted, unheard of characters into global icons, and they showed no sign of slowing down. With each new announcement of another obscure character joining the MCU, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, it was like, damn, these guys know what they're doing. There's no doubt here. While all of these other studios were trying so desperately and failing to make successes out of some of the biggest characters in the world, Marvel was making bank off of a fucking tree, and that made their success look effortless by comparison. They didn't even have to try to create excitement around their movies anymore. When you heard them talk at these events, it didn't seem like a business executive trying to improve their quarterly report. It was like, nah, these guys actually care. They're fans themselves. They felt genuine, especially since they were the first to do this whole cinematic universe thing. So there was never the impression they were trying to copy anyone else. They didn't have that unfortunate layer of jealousy like all of the other studios. And of course, there was the element of mystery baked into everything they did. This feeling that they always had something up their sleeve. Each new post-credit scene, each teaser of what was to come. It was all building to something we weren't quite sure of, but we knew that whatever it was, Marvel would most likely pull it off. When they released a movie that was less than incredible, it didn't sink the franchise. It didn't kill the MCU's momentum at all. Feige had a rule that if you worked for Marvel, you could complain all you wanted within the company, but you could not air those problems publicly. And because of this, we never got the impression that Marvel regretted their less than amazing films, or that they knew they'd fucked up. Once the audience gets even the smallest impression that you're insecure, or envious, or desperate, or you're not quite sure what you're doing, it's game over for you. If Frank Ocean started his career today with the exact same music, but instead of the whole mysterious vibe, he instead did the TikTok thing of begging for attention, like, okay, sure, that might work. He could get 1 million streams from doing that. But at the same time, he'd be silently telling his audience that he's desperate. Any success he got would be on the audience's terms. That excitement around his stuff, it would be less sustainable. It wouldn't translate to his other work. He'd have a fan base, but he wouldn't be embedded in popular culture. It's the same thing with DC. Sure, their first 2 films didn't do great commercially or critically, but there was still at least this coherent vision. It felt like they were happy doing their own thing. They were like, yeah, we're gonna be dark and gritty. We're gonna have Batman kill people. Fuck you! However, when Justice League came out, and they suddenly shifted to the lighter, more Marvel-style approach, they basically spawn-killed their own aura. Even if that movie was a success. Like, imagine for a second that that movie made $1 trillion and got an 11 out of 10 on IMDb. It wouldn't have mattered because there would still be this insecure, jealous energy from the sudden course correction. You'd still have that image of DC in the back of your head, saying, please watch our movie. We're like Marvel now. You like Marvel, right? And DC weren't the only ones with that reputation. You remember the Sony email hack? That shit is still the funniest thing in the world. All of Sony's private conversations leaked to the public. They're calling Kevin Hart a whore, comparing David Fincher to Hitler, and of course it showed just how fucking clueless Sony were when it came to handling Spider-Man. They were so jealous of Marvel. They wanted the same for their Spider-Man universe so badly, but they couldn't because they were just so incompetent, so out of touch. Kevin Feige's giving them these notes, telling them what not to do, and they just didn't listen to any of it. Now, I saw Amazing Spider-Man 2 as a kid, and I didn't know about the email stuff. I had no interest in the inner workings of Hollywood studios. I just wanted to see Spider-Man do some cool shit, and I got what I wanted. I loved that movie, I had a great time, and yet I could still feel this kind of clueless, envious energy, this desire to be like Marvel. See, to get someone hyped is to make them believe in what you're doing, but why would they believe in you if it feels like you don't believe in yourself? Another essential part of that magic Marvel had, especially for the authenticity category, was Stan Lee. Now, a lot of you might think of Stan Lee as the guy who created Marvel, which is like kinda true in a sense. People get pissed off when you say that, because Stan Lee didn't create all of the Marvel characters, not by himself. You could argue that his collaborators, the guys who did a lot of the work, like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, deserve just as much, if not maybe more credit than Stan himself. So he didn't create Marvel in that sense. But in terms of Marvel the brand, creating this identity, this bond between the company and the reader, that was all Stan. He realised that for Marvel to grow, to strengthen its identity, it needed a promoter, a figurehead, who could go out and do all these interviews, visit college campuses, and become this icon, this brand ambassador. When you think of KFC, you think of Colonel Sanders. And now, when you think of Marvel, you think of Stan Lee. If you go through old photos, you can actually pinpoint the moment Stan figured this out. He starts off as a regular guy in the 60s, and then deliberately starts making himself look more unique, more iconic, like a character himself. Part of that was just him adapting to 1970s fashion, but once he found that look that people knew him for, he never let it go. This branding was so successful that even after Stan stopped being involved with the creative process, and later retired from the company altogether, all the comics still said Stan Lee Presents at the top. In the early 2000s, when we got movies like Spider-Man and the X-Men, the filmmakers paid tribute to Stan by giving them these cameos. But a lot of these were very blink and you'll miss him. I remember recognising him in Spider-Man 2 when I was a kid, and I was so proud of myself. I felt like I'd uncovered this secret almost, because it was so brief, so hidden. The MCU, however, paid more attention to Stan. They made him the figurehead of the universe. It was a spectacle, an inside joke that everyone could take part in. And like with the comics, they used his image, his voice, that strong brand, and used it on stuff he had no involvement in. Guardians of the Galaxy? He didn't create that shit. And yet he still says, what, is it in Guardians 2? He's like, please, I've got so many more stories to tell. There's this implication that these are all his stories. And that creates a certain image in the back of your head. One that says, this isn't a franchise run by shareholders and maniacal Hollywood execs. This is all the result of one man's imagination. And all these guys, these writers and directors and producers and actors, they're all working hard to make his imagination come to life. And the audience can join in on that appreciation. That's one more thing Marvel had over everyone else. That added to the magic, to the image in everyone's heads. And no matter how hard everyone else tried, they just couldn't be him. One of the first threats to Marvel's domination, you see, was television. See, after the release of The Avengers, once they'd proven everyone wrong on the movie side, it was time to expand and prove themselves on the TV side, too. This would be difficult. See, it's one thing to convince an Iron Man fan to go watch Captain America or Ant-Man even, but to convince that same person to go watch a 22-episode TV show that has basically no characters from the movies? Good luck with that. Now, Marvel tried their best to convince people, you know, the whole hashtag it's all connected thing. Inhumans was shown in the cinema, filmed with IMAX cameras. I mean, they really wanted you to know about those IMAX cameras. It was kind of their only selling point. Marvel tried to signal that these shows, they weren't just television. This was Marvel television, a cinematic experience on the small screen. Of course, despite their best efforts, they weren't really convincing. First, there were the visual limitations that came with network television at the time. This was the early 2010s. High-budget, prestige shows were quite rare, and streaming wasn't really a thing. If you were making a standard network show, you'd be looking at a 20-something episode season with basically $5 to work with per episode. Let's play a game of Spot the Difference. Here's a Marvel movie. Now here's their first TV show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Marvel movie? Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Marvel movie? Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Honestly, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't look bad. It doesn't look amateur. It just looks like TV. And that's fine. I fucking love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I think if you stick with it, it's got some of the best stuff the MCU has to offer. But production-wise, it is a TV show. Like, I understand why a lot of the movie-only people will see these out-of-context clips on YouTube and comment shit like, this looks like a fucking fan film. Because there's such a visual gap here between the movies and the shows. Even the Netflix shows like Daredevil. I mean, that show looks beautiful. Like, I actually think it looks way better than a lot of the Marvel movies. But it still looks like like TV. Again, that's not an insult, it's just different visually. Your brain's gonna treat it differently. So that's the first reason they couldn't convince people, this visual hierarchy that had formed. But there was also an actual hierarchy within Marvel, this corporate structure that ended up screwing the TV shows over. See, it used to be that you had Marvel Studios on top, with big boss Kevin Feige, and those guys, they were a movie studio. They were busy making the movies, and so you had Marvel Television, a separate entity with its own people in charge. And they were the ones making Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Daredevil, etc, etc. When you have these two divisions, it's going to be harder to communicate, to get everyone on the same page, to make your interconnected universe actually connected. At the start, it worked out pretty well. Those who've watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. will remember the plot twist in season 1, where the agents are minding their own business, they've got their own shit going on, and then they suddenly realise that, oh my god, Captain America 2 is happening. The movie where S.H.I.E.L.D. ceases to exist. I was one of the people watching the show when it was first coming out, and that whole crossover was so fucking cool. Imagine this, right? You've been watching the show for the better part of a year, and it's pretty good, it's fun, but it's also kind of formulaic. Every episode will have the agents finding a person with superpowers, causing chaos, the agents will try and talk them down, or just fucking kill them, they return back to base, have a laugh together, rinse and repeat. Then The Winter Soldier comes out, you go and watch that in the cinema, you find out that S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually corrupt, that Hydra has taken it over, you then come home to watch the new episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you watch as the entire fabric of the show is undone. The agents can't call it a day, they can't go back to base, because there's no more base. And the now derailed show just keeps going, without S.H.I.E.L.D. Everyone's betraying each other, characters are being jumped left and right, you've got Coulson having a mental breakdown over the fact that the one thing he dedicated his life to is just gone now. The once plucky side characters are now having to debate which one of them is going to off themselves to save the other. It was fucking awesome, and it had a Scottish guy in it, so instantly I was like, yeah, this is the best show ever.
What the hell? Who designed this? Finally, after 6 months!
Now, having seen the movies affect the show, I remember being really excited for the show to start affecting the movies. Maybe the Avengers would find out that Coulson was still alive, or Captain America would find out that S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't actually dead, and the agents had been rebuilding it in secret. In retrospect, this was never going to happen. Behind the scenes, the movie guys were doing their own thing. They had no interest in any crossovers, and the TV guys had to beg for scraps. They were like, please, can we use Loki's scepter from the Avengers movie? Can we put that in our show? No, fuck off. We're using it for Age of Ultron. Here, take Lady Sif instead. That's the best we can do. It was like the younger brother being given the unplugged controller, saying, oh yeah, you can play in the MCU too. This is your universe as well. Then, as the MCU progressed, the two divisions grew even further apart, started to have fucking beef with each other, and everything became even less connected. Basically, you had Kevin Feige in charge of Marvel Studios, Jeff Loeb in charge of Marvel Television, and they both answered to Ike Perlmutter, the CEO of Marvel Entertainment, and by all accounts the CEO of being a massive allegedly. According to the Financial Times, Perlmutter once told people not to worry about the recasting of War Machine since all black people look the same. So that's the kind of guy we're dealing with. Perlmutter's job was to maximise toy sales. That's how Marvel made their money, and good movies don't necessarily sell merchandise. So you had Perlmutter and the rest of Marvel Entertainment breathing down Feige's neck, saying, no, change that, take that out, that won't make us money. That'll save us some money. You can imagine how frustrated Feige was dealing with all these different demands, especially when it was stuff like, don't put Iron Man in Civil War, remove the soundtrack to Guardians of the Galaxy, don't make Black Panther or Captain Marvel, because that certainly won't make any money. I wonder why. But no matter what, you need to make Inhumans. Inhumans is essential to the Marvel Universe. Now, Feige did his best to fight against this, but by 2015, this relationship had reached its limit. It got to the point where Disney CEO Bob Iger had to step in and tell Perlmutter to back off. See, Marvel Studios was a part of Marvel Entertainment, but Marvel Entertainment was a part of Disney. And so Iger, being at the very top of the corporate ladder, said to Feige, don't worry, you don't have to listen to those guys anymore. From now on, you report to us. You report to me, the cool CEO, the one with the fucking sneaker collection.
I'm actually a sneaker addict. Only cool people wear cool sneakers.
Finally, the MCU was free from this bullshit, or at least the movies were. This rearrangement only applied to Marvel Studios. Marvel Television was still very much trapped under Marvel Entertainment, and Perlmutter looked over at Feige, enjoying his newfound freedom, and he scowled, and then he looked down at Jeff Loeb, who he still controlled, and he said, Oi, you're not going fucking anywhere. If communication between the movies and shows was bad before, now it was pretty much non-existent. The younger brother still had the unplugged controller, but now it was like the older brother had moved out and taken the console with him. The TV guys weren't even kept in the loop anymore, and the biggest victim of this was, surprise surprise, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Up until this point, the show had done its best to acknowledge certain events from the movies so it still made sense continuity-wise. If the world got attacked by alien elves, you'd see the guys in the show deal with it. Or if the Avengers split up after a violent political conflict, it'd at least get a mention somewhere. The characters would be like, damn, that shit sucks. Even when the showrunners stopped being kept in the loop as much, they were smart. They wrote in all of these narrative safeguards to stop this disconnect from being a problem. They'd set half a season within a computer simulation, or an alternate future, so if something happened in the movies, they wouldn't have to reference it. It wouldn't break the wider continuity at all. It was pretty smooth sailing, even when Infinity War came along. Now that's a movie that has a very universal effect on the MCU, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did its best to join in. They acknowledged the events of the movie in the show. One of the Kree, I think, shows up to warn them. He's like, Thanos is on his way to Earth right now, he's gonna fuck your ass. Problem is, he only tells like one guy who's like the biggest asshole, so no one listens to him anyway when he tries to tell everyone else. Then at the end of the season, they don't actually have to deal with the snap because it hasn't happened yet. I think if you try and sync it all up, the last scene of season 5 should take place during the Battle of Wakanda. They don't have to deal with that whole nightmare until next season, so they can end this season on a nice, resolved note. Coulson, having become Ghost Rider in Season 4, and therefore having burned through all of the Kree blood in his system from Season 1 that was keeping him alive after Loki stabbed him in the Avengers, retires from S.H.I.E.L.D. and gets his happy ending, passing on his duties to the people he trusts the most, while he lives out the rest of his days with the love of his life. It's emotional, it's satisfying, no snap necessary, and that's totally on purpose, right? Well, there's no way to know for sure, but I think that given the total secrecy surrounding Infinity War's ending, along with the rumours that Perlmutter blocked communication between the two divisions, it wouldn't be crazy to assume that the S.H.I.E.L.D. guys didn't know how Infinity War was going to end. I reckon that the references that are in Season 5 were based on rough plot details they were given, or maybe even guesswork. The S.H.I.E.L.D. writers could probably figure out that Thanos was going to vaguely attack New York at some point.
Have you seen all this weird stuff happening in New York?
I mean, it worked out for them. They technically scraped by with the timing of Season 5's ending, but I honestly don't think it was intentional. Okay, so Season 6. They could deal with the snap in Season 6, now that everyone knew what happened, right? Well, like with Infinity War, Marvel Studios was ultra secretive with its sequel. That shit was on lockdown, to the point where the TV guys, I think from what I can gather from interviews, only knew two main facts. One, that Endgame would undo the snap, that everyone would come back, and two, that Spider-Man Far From Home would deal with the immediate ramifications of everyone's return. Beyond that, basically nothing. You remember watching Endgame in the cinema, and that 5 years later came on screen, and everyone was like, oh shit, we're getting a time skip. Going into it, everyone just assumed the movie would take place over a few days, that the snap would be reversed shortly after it took place. Everyone assumed this, including, apparently, the writers of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm sure they thought that by setting Season 6 a whole year after Season 5, they were sidestepping the whole issue. That by this point in the timeline, the snap would have been resolved ages ago. Any immediate ramifications established in Far From Home, they wouldn't even have to worry about, because this is a whole year later. Everyone would already be back, they would have had ages to get over it. In fact, they probably wouldn't even talk about it anymore. Remember when half of us disappeared for like a day? Yeah, who gives a fuck? This way, the S.H.I.E.L.D. crew didn't have to worry about any of the details they didn't know. They didn't have to fire half the cast for a whole season. They could keep doing their own thing, where the only problem their characters would have to worry about would be the new main villain, a 1,000-year-old alien who for some fucking reason looks identical to Phil Coulson. Sure, it'd be a bit weird that no one mentioned the snap in-universe, but it was the best they could do given the situation. Of course, we all know that once Endgame came out, it was established that the snap lasted 5 years, which firmly placed Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 6 during that 5-year blip. And it broke the canon. I mean, unless you want to believe that everyone in the show got super lucky and no one got snapped, which I guess there's a non-zero chance of that happening. And no one mentions that half the planet's currently gone, but maybe it's like when you have a family tragedy, but no one wants to bring it up because it's like your mum's gonna start crying, so it's like this weird elephant in the room. Or it just doesn't make sense. The canon is just fucked now. Now, the showrunners went on to say they broke canon on purpose, that they prioritised telling their own story over worrying about the logistics of the wider MCU. And while I'm sure that's true, I'm also sure they were trying not to say, yeah, they didn't tell us shit. We had no idea. Since the beginning of the shows, Marvel had wanted people to believe that everything was connected, and it was a promise that just couldn't be fulfilled logistically. Every time there was a discrepancy, every time the fucking Avengers Tower was missing from the background, it was frustrating, but it could be ignored. It didn't break the immersion altogether. But now, with this, they couldn't hide the disconnect anymore. Not only could you expect the movies not to acknowledge the TV shows, but now you couldn't even expect the TV shows to acknowledge the movies, which was the whole selling point in the first place. Despite how reluctant Feige was to discuss his concerns publicly, It's hard to believe that this whole TV thing didn't bother him privately. I mean, his whole thing as a producer was control, right? He had maintained this airtight continuity right down to the fucking arm thing. You know about this? How Iron Man got hit in the arm by a missile in the first movie, and from that point on he kept sustaining injuries to the same area, to the point where you can see it very subtly shaking later on.
My left arm is numb, is that normal?
But then there's this whole other division that Feige has no control over, run by this guy who has the complete opposite attitude to him, and refuses to cooperate out of spite. Anytime a new Marvel show came out and it sucked or broke canon, it risked diluting the Marvel brand, the aura, slowly breaking this promise with the audience. Feige once mentioned that he took great pride in those Rotten Tomatoes scores, the fact that every project they'd done so far had been certified fresh, and yet his weird, estranged little brother over here was racking up rotten ratings in his name, in his MCU, and there was nothing he could do about it. So that must have sucked, but apart from that, Feige couldn't really complain. Some TV shows aside, it worked out pretty well for them. Now don't get me wrong, a lot of that was down to the people themselves, right, all the effort they put in, but there was also an undeniable element of luck. See, when you're executing a project this big, this ambitious, there are a number of things that just aren't in your control. First off, your main cast. Having these actors lined up to be the faces of your franchise who you will need for multiple movies across an entire decade, that's a big risk. And sure, they could get away with recasting at the beginning, but imagine if they had to recast Captain America or Iron Man in between Civil War and Infinity War. Like, that's just not gonna work. Obviously there's contracts in place, but what if one of them gets arrested, or dies even? You're fucked. Also, Marvel was owned by Disney, and so they had to pray that being owned by an evil megacorporation, they weren't going to be fucked over for no reason. That they weren't going to have their budget slashed, or their structure rearranged, or whatever outside interference that would mess with their already chaotic way of working. Who the fuck is that? I'm gonna redo this. As we know now, Marvel got lucky. None of the main actors got into any serious trouble, and the whole Disney thing worked out too. Marvel was incredibly fortunate to have someone like Bob Iger at the top, looking out for them. He was pretty hands-off, because he trusted Feige. He was smart enough not to interfere with the guy who was making them billions of dollars. There were only 3 times that Disney had made any major decisions that affected what Marvel were doing, and each of these had worked out in the end for Feige. There was the split I mentioned earlier from Marvel Entertainment that gave Feige his freedom from Perlmutter. There was the firing of James Gunn, only for him to later be rehired, so who really gives a shit? And when the Sony Spider-Man deal fell through, Iger sorted it out. He made it work between Sony and Marvel. It's funny how most of their problems could be solved by just calling up Bob Iger. It's like when your sibling's pissing you off, so you go running to your dad's and he sorts it. Also, now that I think about it, the whole TV thing was a pain, but they'd actually gotten pretty lucky there too. The limited TV budgets and the lack of communication between divisions, those turned out to be blessings in disguise. It had created this unspoken hierarchy. Despite all the advertising trying to tell you otherwise, the audience kinda understood that these shows were firmly beneath the movies, both visually and narratively. I remember when I stopped watching Iron Fist in 2017. I was really disappointed, but at no point did I think, oh, the MCU's fallen off. I didn't get the feeling that I was going to miss out on the wider story by dropping it. Because, yeah, it was in the MCU, but it wasn't MCU, you know? This hierarchy, this disconnect, as frustrating as it was sometimes as a viewer, it was kind of the best case scenario. It created this weirdly organised chaos where you could have a ton of different projects coming out in the same year, hours worth of content, and everyone's brains just kind of organised it all. Like, you understood what you needed to watch despite no one telling you that. Yeah, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. thing was a pain, but like, they were doing time travel stuff in season 5. Maybe they got pushed to an alternate timeline where the snap didn't happen or something. Anyways, the point is that Marvel did it. They'd started off as the underdogs, stuck with these characters that nobody wanted, and they turned that into an empire, which honestly was a miracle. Like, putting aside their insane luck with the actors and Disney and the whole TV thing, their actual approach to movies, like the thing they could control, was so unconventional. Like, it shouldn't have worked. 21 films after Iron Man 1, and they were still doing the whole improvisational, constantly changing their mind at the last minute approach. They shot Endgame, their biggest movie, the culmination of 11 years of storytelling, without a locked script. And you might think that's mad, like why would you take that risk? But honestly, that was probably the safest option. This method, it's what made them so successful. They'd gotten so used to working this way. So why change that? They knew they had the people on board who could handle it, who could work in this improvisational environment. They knew they had Feige there, breathing down everyone's necks, tying it all together. Usually when a movie goes through tons of reshoots, it's a bad sign. Like the studio's in trouble. But not Marvel. Endgame had endless reshoots, probably the most reshoots of any movie ever. But these reshoots, they weren't a backup. They were a built-in part of Marvel's process. They'd film what they had of the script, see how it all worked out in the editing bay, and if something wasn't working, or if someone had a new idea, or if half the fucking plot had changed since they first started filming, then no worries. Bring the actors back, roll through it again. I mean, it clearly worked for them.
Marvel sort of adopted this into their style. They said, you know what, it is going to be rough. Let's just plan to shoot new
Bake
stuff.
in additional photography.
It was so smart because it's like, and you could see how that really changed and made their movies better.
Marvel also listened to the audience, which, if you're dealing with Marvel fans, is a slippery fucking slope. I've been in comment sections, I've seen some of the suggestions in there. Obviously, Marvel had common sense. They didn't blindly follow their audience. If they did, the MCU would have been dead within a week, but they did listen. They sincerely paid attention to what people were saying, what fans got the most excited for, and what they maybe didn't get so excited for. What's the thing Bill Hader says?
When people give you notes on something, when they tell you it's wrong, they're usually right. When they tell you how to fix it, they're wrong. They're right, there is something probably wrong in that area, but then when they tell you how to fix it, it's always wrong. Once they say, here's what I would do, just turn them off. You gotta figure it out yourself.
Marvel had seen the reaction to the Thor movies, identified him as the weakest link, and thought, okay, the audience is right there. We do need to take this in a different direction. What that direction is, however, will be up to us. We'll decide how to fix it. They did this all the time, even for the smaller things. Originally, Tony and Peter's reunion in Endgame was supposed to be more quippy, more light-hearted. However, having seen that strong audience reaction to Spider-Man's death in Infinity War, that moment between the two of them, they decided to reshoot the reunion, to make it more sincere, more emotional, because the audience was bound to appreciate it more. After Endgame went on to become the highest-grossing movie of all time, Marvel now had this established, proven formula, one that had allowed them to complete this incredibly risky, decade-long project and take over the world. You had their improvisational approach, led by talent who could thrive in that environment. You had an insanely effective producer that oversaw everything, who listened to the audience. You had that aura, that magic that let them rise above everyone else, that got people invested for the long run. And of course, there was that luck they counted on when it came to things outside of their control. Surely then, Marvel could have just stuck to the formula going forward. No drastic changes, just sticking to what had worked, and everything would have been fine. Well, that's the thing. They didn't change anything. They stuck to the formula. And it killed them! See, post-Endgame was initially a very promising time for Marvel. Marvel Television was folded into Marvel Studios, and Feige was promoted to Chief Creative Officer of Marvel Entertainment. Now this seemed like a smart move. This was really good news at the time. Finally, Feige, the only guy who seemed to have some sense, had control over everything. Now there would be no more lack of communication, no more petty corporate beef. From now on, if they had TV shows that were fucking up, if they weren't working out, Feige could sort it himself. Marvel Studios then started releasing their own TV shows. This was part of a request from Bob Iger, who'd come down from his ivory tower and said, hey, Feige, I need you to give me some TV shows for this brand new streaming service we've got coming out. Don't worry about the budget, choose whatever characters you want, right? I trust you. I'll give you whatever you want, I'll let you borrow my fucking sneaker collection. Just give me the shows. Just keep them coming. Now this seemed a little risky, a movie studio making TV shows, but this was Marvel. They'd always taken risks, and up until now, it'd always work out for them in the end. And to start with, these new shows were a massive success. They were miles better than the old ones from a technical point of view. These shows could actually afford the big actors, these set pieces. Finally, it was hashtag connected, for real this time. When you were watching these shows, you could think, oh shit, this is actually gonna go somewhere, like in the wider MCU. I'm aware that it sounds like I'm contradicting myself here. I said that Marvel changed nothing, and yet here I am talking about this massive change for them. So let me make a distinction. Yes, the shows were a change for Marvel, but, and this is the crucial bit, they didn't change anything about their actual approach. Their formula remained exactly the same. See, TV shows are a whole different beast, production-wise. It's a different way of doing things. There's different schedules and roles, and Marvel Studios recognized this. They said, okay, we're not a TV company. This isn't our thing. But we do know how to make movies. In fact, we're kind of the experts. So let's just treat these shows as 6-hour films. Let's do the thing we're good at and change literally nothing about our methods or structure. And so they stuck with the formula for everything, for TV and movies going forward. There was that same improvisational approach, all of those last-minute rewrites, that chaotic way of working that they had mastered. And for the wider story, the future of the MCU, they were just as relaxed. Just like how they hadn't planned for Thanos when they were doing Phase 1, they didn't settle on a new main villain straight away for Phase 4. They kept an open mind, planted some seeds along the way just to see how they'd grow. They continued to listen to the audience. When Feige saw the popular fan casting of John Krasinski as Reed Richards, he thought, okay, we've got Doctor Strange 2 coming up, there's some multiverse shit going on, let's throw him in there, shall we? We're not going to confirm him as the MCU's Mr. Fantastic, not yet, but let's just test the waters, let's see what the reaction will be. This is going to sound weird, but Marvel got kind of lucky with COVID. I don't think they appreciated just how well that worked out for them. A lot of really celebrated artists, right, the greats, they'll go away for a while, to the point where you think they must have abandoned their audience, or they must have died. That absence, that adds to the magic. That's what gets people hungry. That's what makes the eventual return so special, so exciting and satisfying. Marvel's plan pre-COVID was to start Phase 4 off with Black Widow in May 2020. And that wouldn't have been the worst thing, it's just that releasing something that's kind of safe, a bit mid, shortly after Phase 3 had just ended, it wouldn't have sent the right message. Of course, the lockdown happened, Marvel was absent for a good while, and returned over a year and a half later with WandaVision instead. Think about it. Marvel, at the height of their powers, looked at their audience of starving superhero fans and gave them a TV show about two side characters in the Avengers where the first 2 episodes are in black and white and low-key nothing happens for like 3 episodes. That is the ultimate flex. That's Marvel very loudly restating the terms of engagement, saying that this new phase is going to be on their terms and you're fucking lucky to be witnessing it. Did you ever see the post about how someone accidentally watched the German dub of WandaVision but they just didn't question it because they trusted in Feige's vision so much? That's what I'm talking about. That's what aura gets you. They then got even more magic for including Darcy and Agent Woo. Once again, they were taking aspects of their previous, not so popular movies and reminding us that they were still part of the family. I don't think anyone was asking for these guys to come back, but Marvel was like, fuck you, these guys were pretty cool. When we did get stuff like Black Widow or Eternals, these projects that weren't so great or a bit of a letdown, it didn't hurt the MCU brand. Eternals may not have been the masterpiece I was hoping for at the time, but this was Marvel. They'd probably figure something out. We'd see the Eternals again in another project and they'd make it work. It was about 2022, I think, that the cracks started to appear. First off, their improvisational methods started to blow up in their faces, and the talent they had on board, while trying the best they could, just couldn't keep up. There's this quote from Xochitl Gomez, one of the actors from Doctor Strange 2 who came out in defense of the movie's writer, Michael Waldron. She explained that the studio asked him for 33 rewrites, and I'll bet money that some, if not most of those requests were last minute, during filming. That's just the Marvel way of doing things, that's how they've always done it, and in this case, they pushed too far. Obviously, Michael Waldron is a grown man, he does have some responsibility over how that movie turned out, but I feel for him. That way of working must have been a nightmare. Also, the TV shows that Marvel were doing didn't have that crucial built-in reshoot time that their movies had. The shows were like 6 hours long. That's a lot more stuff to film than with a 2-hour movie. You can't spend ages reshooting and ironing out the narrative creases. And so you end up with Marvel, a company that thrived off of the whole not having a final script, throwing it all together and then cleaning it up afterwards approach, making these shows where they couldn't clean it up afterwards. But that way of working, that's all they knew, so like I said, it worked at the start for shows like WandaVision and Loki, but as the shows kept coming out, it became clear that Marvel just couldn't cope. Ironically, these shows' production value and connection to the MCU fucked them, because it had done away with this unspoken hierarchy that up until now had maintained this chaotic order.
They look like they're on the same budget. It starts to meld together into this homogenous, MCU-ified media ball.
Now, every time a show did bomb, they no longer had that psychological barrier in place, this unspoken visual and narrative separation that made you think, it's just the lowercase MCU. No, these were all MCU. Capital fucking letters. This explains the overwhelming feeling that people talk about, the complaint that the MCU has too much stuff now, despite there actually being less shows than before. When Marvel realised this, they stuck the Marvel Television label onto their shows in an attempt to separate the movies and TV. But guys, that's not gonna work! It's a production thing! People have eyes! It also didn't help that a great deal of Marvel's success up until that point was down to Kevin Feige. It turns out that one man tying everything together is a great strategy, until said man gets a little bit too busy. Funnily enough, having more control had given Feige less control, if that makes sense. He couldn't be in all the rooms, ensuring quality, making sure all the pieces were fitting nicely together. So the improv blew up in their faces, the talent couldn't keep up, Feige was compromised. What's next? You're going to tell me that listening to the audience somehow backfired? Now, you might be surprised to learn that Kang wasn't meant to be the next Thanos, not originally. According to this book, The Reign of Marvel Studios, the decision was only made because of the fan reaction to the initial performance. They saw that people were really keen on Jonathan Majors, and so they did what they'd always done. They thought, okay, the audience is onto something here. This guy's got something special. Let's give him a bigger part. Let's make him central to our future plans. Hell, let's name the next Avengers movie after him and announce it to fucking everyone. everyone. Wouldn't be the first time we've banked the success of the franchise on one actor. But then, when Jonathan Majors was convicted of harassment and assault, an obviously very serious issue that took priority over the MCU's future, Marvel was left without the villain they'd just bet their entire universe on. Marvel's luck with Disney also ran out. Feige said, okay, we're stretched too thin. Our strategy is falling apart. And so he ran into Iger's office. He said, Bob, we're in trouble. I can't keep the promise we made on those TV shows. We're lagging behind. You gotta let us slow down. Let us relax, right? Wait, who the fuck are you? You don't have a sneaker collection. Bob Chapek was the new CEO of Disney around this time, having replaced Bob Iger. Now, it wouldn't be accurate to say that all of the problems with the Disney Plus stuff were caused by Chapek, nor would it be accurate to say that Iger was this fucking saint who did everything perfectly. I think both of them are to blame for the MCU's mess. Iger was the one who asked them to produce all of these TV shows to start with, right? The whole oversaturation problem originated with him, and then he fucked off before anything started to go wrong. But having Chapek, this new CEO who reportedly lacked the instincts that Iger had, whose unstable leadership was kind of running the company into the ground, and he wouldn't budge on any of the demands for streaming content, it didn't exactly help Feige at the time. It's like he no longer had the reliable dad he could go running to. That dad had been replaced by this weird uncle. By the time Iger came back, it was too late. The damage had been done. Marvel's methods had fucked them, their talent couldn't keep up, the producer was stretched too thin, their luck had run out, and as a result, the people had turned on them. So what the hell would they do now? Despite Marvel's failure, despite this rapid fall-off that came from their trusty formula going bad, they still had one thing going for them. One precious resource they held over everyone else. And sure, Marvel's magic wasn't as strong now, especially since Stan Lee had passed away. That beloved icon they had purposely made a vital part of their brand was no longer with us, taking away that inside joke that, up until now, had prevented this industrial, impersonal feeling. But the show wasn't over yet, and up until this point, we hadn't really gotten the impression that Marvel was insecure or regretful. It was like, okay, don't worry Marvel, we still haven't seen you afraid, so you've got the opportunity to lock in here. Come up with something new, go in a different direction, give us something we don't even know to ask for. Do what you've always done, take the stuff that didn't work and find a new home for it. Make us excited for the Eternals to show up again, and for them to meet Nick Fury and She-Hulk and Kate Bishop. You're Marvel, all of your ideas work out eventually, and we'll all be waiting for you. Because of your confidence, because of your effortlessness. What's that? Robert Downey Jr.'s back?
So this is how
Aura
dies. With thunderous applause.
What the fuck are you doing? Why? I mean, I know why. Their whole formula had imploded, and they didn't want to change anything about their methods, so they reached out to the talent that was proven to thrive in these improvisational environments. But in doing so, they fucked themselves way more than they ever realized. If there's one thing you don't want to appear as an artist or a company or whatever, it's desperate. This is why the whole indie artist begging for pre-saves shit doesn't work. Because there's a unique satisfaction people get from ignoring someone who's desperate for their attention. Like when you get an ad on YouTube that's like, don't skip this ad, and you're like, shut up, and then you skip it, right? It feels good. Now this here won't exactly be new information to a lot of you. Everyone knew this was desperate and lame at the time. Marvel likely knew as well. To them, this was probably a necessary, slightly embarrassing hurdle in a long journey that will eventually end in their redemption. But that won't happen. What they didn't realise was how widespread the effects of this moment would actually be. When I looked back at some of my least favourite movies in the Infinity Saga, my actual opinion hadn't changed. I still thought they kinda sucked, quality-wise. But watching them back after Endgame, there was now this extra rose-tinted layer. There was a certain thrill, an appeal that came from knowing that Marvel never gave up on these movies, that they openly had no regrets. Like a good magician, they made these slip-ups seem like they were all part of the act in the end. And it was this ownership, this sheer fucking confidence, that propped these movies up in my mind. Now Doomsday isn't out yet, so who knows, they might find a way to wrap the whole thing together and make the multiverse saga appear stronger as a whole, but this is not a promising start to that process. This moment where Marvel was so openly desperate for a saviour, when they were so obviously crossing their fingers, looking at the audience for approval, not only has it created a stench of weakness that will follow them around wherever they go from now on, but it's retroactively made Phase 4 and 5 feel even weaker. Previously, there was this sincere, mutual hype that surrounded the early stuff. Marvel seemed excited to be building something new, and so I was excited as well. It made me overlook the weak final acts, the dodgy CGI. They had this value that is totally lost now, thanks to this perceived abandonment of these projects. Without that infectious enthusiasm from Marvel, Marvel. That invincible confidence. These projects just seem weaker now, despite the fact nothing's changed about them. So what actually killed the MCU? Technically speaking, Marvel's improvisational, almost gambling-style production mentality, combined with the general corporate culture of Hollywood that industrializes art, was always going to trip them up at some point. Their total dominance over the industry led to them coasting off their proven formula, a strategy which combined improvisation, reliable talent, Feige's control, receptiveness to the audience, and so on. Then, thanks to Marvel's reluctance to adapt, plus some very unfortunate bad luck, these elements that previously brought them success suddenly all backfired within a short period after Endgame. The massive television-shaped thorn in their side had actually been preserving order, and it was once they removed it that everything plunged into chaos. But all of that, all of those technical problems, Marvel can fix them. In fact, they pretty much already have. They've reduced the amount of projects they're working on, so their improvisational approach won't be so careless anymore. They've got the reliable talent back on board. There's still no visual hierarchy between the movies and shows, but that stopped being an issue, really, given the reduced amount of shows per year. They're also more receptive to the audience than ever before. It's clear that the guys running things, they've really examined what people didn't like post-Endgame, and they're making every effort to correct that. Everything on paper should be fine now. They're going to keep giving us exactly what we want. They're going to keep giving us Daredevil, they're bringing back the Defenders, Spider-Man's coming out soon, Wonder Man Season 2, that's going to be great. Also, Doomsday will likely be a hit. I mean, Marvel's got everything riding on that. They'll have engineered it so it can't not be a massive success. They even created this defense mechanism in advance with Deadpool 3. You know, the bit about how these actors are going to keep getting dragged back until they're 90. It's this strategic self-awareness they've deployed so they can control the fan reaction from now on. Instead of people calling out what they're about to do as lazy or uninspired, people are now going to be like, haha, it's like the Deadpool thing, it's just like Marvel said. Ha, we love you, Marvel. It's actually kind of genius. And because Marvel's doing everything right now, because they keep winning short term and keep manufacturing reasons for people to stay hyped, they're gonna expect a return to the good old days. But at the same time, they're utterly blind to this thing that is just beyond metrics. Aura, magic, sauce, whatever you want to call it. This intangible element that makes people follow you to the ends of the earth. You don't get that by bending to the whims of your audience. In fact, that can have the opposite effect. Trying to be attractive can actually be unattractive. This moment here isn't just desperate. It marks the very first time Marvel openly acknowledged they were in trouble, and in doing so, they changed the terms of engagement with the audience. They shattered their sacred image, and something shifted. The general audience might not totally be aware of it, but they can feel it deep down. That image in the back of your head, it's of us now. It's us looking down on Marvel instead of the other way around, because we can feel them looking up at us. And I'm sorry, but you can complain all you want about bad CGI and loose plot threads and too many fucking TV shows. That all pales in comparison to the moment when Marvel gave up their ability to do things on their own terms. By betraying each of those 4 magical pillars all at once, they lost that invisible, cultural, fuck you magic they spent a decade conjuring. A box office bomb is one thing. A rotten review score, you can come back from that. But now that Marvel's image is contaminated, that's a poison with no cure. That's like stuttering in an argument. It doesn't matter what you say or do from now on. Everything's just gonna feel a bit feeble now. What once felt prestigious will now feel cheap. What should be dramatic will now feel superficial. Marvel won't realise this because it won't necessarily be reflected in box office results or movie review scores. In spite of everything they're doing right, technically, they're going to keep having to try so much harder to keep people's attention, to fight for their place in the culture, and they're not going to know why. Fantastic Four and Superman were equally successful on paper. Similar box office, similar review scores, both movies had the same level of craftsmanship, they were both well made from a filmmaking perspective. What then was the difference between them? What made Superman more culturally relevant? If I have to say the word aura one more time, I'm going to delete my channel. But it is, I'm telling you, aura is everything. Any goodwill, any magic generated by Marvel's new projects now will be isolated to those projects. That subconscious faith that stopped you from noticing the bad stuff, that once made you look up at the screen in this moment of pure, transcendent awe, it no longer extends to everything MCU. And that's the distinction Marvel isn't making. That Doomsday is exciting, but it's not enchanting. It's the same level of hype you'd feel seeing a firework go off. You're gonna be like, oh shit, this is really cool in the moment, but then you just walk away and get on with your life. It's not exactly a magical experience. They're no longer Frank Ocean with the song titles anymore. They're more like DJ Khaled. And nobody wants to be DJ Khaled. I'm still kind of rooting for them. I want them to do well, but for now, they're just another movie studio. It's going to be a lot more difficult for me to believe in them now that I know they don't believe in themselves. When I was writing this part of the video, I was wishing I could have just been inside that room to see what thought process led to them bringing Downey back and doing this big 180. Was this Feige's idea? Did Disney force him to do it? Did Downey come up with the idea himself and suggest it to Feige? And then I realised, hang on, I've been doing this a while now, right? I've got some clout, you could say. I've got some connections. Why not ask the man himself?
So the first question is basically to do with Robert Downey Jr. Obviously, he's been announced as Doctor Doom, and when that happened, there was like kind of two sides to the fan reaction, where like one side was more positive, saying that like it was gonna save the MCU, if you like, whereas the other side was more critical, saying that it kind of signaled like a lack of confidence almost. I was wondering, when it came to first making that decision, how did you how did you how did that start off? How did you first come up with that idea?
I remember being in my office. I remember what's up with the alligator?
What this?
It looks like me.
Kevin Feige was raised on an alligator farm. You were raised on an alligator farm.
Oh, 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 I remember the alligators. Ah, I have hair.
Fuck it. I'll end on that.
I love you.